Good afternoon. It's my honor and privilege to welcome a special guest. He's been on the show before. He's very well known and accomplished, and he's made the most of lockdown. Let me welcome Mr. Arun Maira, who really doesn't need an introduction to the August gathering in business or in society. We're talking to him today about the book, The Learning Factory, how the leaders of Tata's became nation builder. Welcome, Mr. Maira. It's a pleasure to talk to you again, and I'm sure you're writing a lot of books.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Batra, Annurag. Thank you very much. Yes, I finished another one, which is called The Solutions Factory, which is about my years in consulting and what I learned as a consultant. So you got the Learning Factory and then the Solutions Factory. But that Penguin is going to publish probably next year.
So, Maira, I'm getting your voice.
Hello? You can't hear me?
Yeah, it's better. In between your... Yes, very clearly. Now better.
Yeah. Sorry, I was saying that, yes, I finished another book, which is now with Penguin, called The Solutions Factory. It's about my 25 years with consulting and what I learned there. My first 25 years with Tata's is in the Learning Factory.
I like that. And, when I was preparing and reading your book, I put a question saying, how can learning be in a factory? I mean, it's oxymoronish. Learning is very one-to-one. It is very individualistic. And, different people learn through different cues. So isn't the name The Learning Factory a little bit oxymoronish?
No, it is about, as you said, individuals learning. An individual learns from others, like you said, and an individual learns from sensing what is going on in the environment and reflecting on it, learning from others. In fact, my boss, my great mentor, Dr. Sumant Mulgaonkar, said this to me.
Whose photo you put with Mr. Ratan Tata in the book also?
With J.R.D. Tata.
Sorry, with Mr. J.R.D. Tata. Yes, that's a slip. I meant Mr. J.R.D. Tata.
Yes. In fact, he told me this when he pushed me to the factory out of the office where I was working as his executive assistant. He said, no, you've got to go to learn to the factory, because I was sent there as a very senior person to sort of take charge of a large part of the factory, which is the whole human resources side of the factory. And I said, the people there are so much older than me, experienced than me, and I'm going to be their boss. I mean, how will they respect me? I can't tell them anything. So he said, you're not going there to teach, Maira, you're going there to learn. Listen to everyone, and that's how you learn. And he used to practice it himself, and I learned this. He would go and he was very curious about everybody he met, whether it was the gardener planting things outside the office and the factory. He would ask him, "Kya kar rahe ho? Kaise seekha ye? Aur parson jab kiya tha, lagaya tha, to kya asar hua tha?" Meaning, always, have you learned something from what you're doing? And so that was what his insight to me was: keep learning from what you're doing, learning from others from what they are doing. And that in the factory, as you can imagine, there are hundreds of people doing very different things. So there's so much opportunity to learn one-to-one, as you would put it. But more than that, in a factory, because there's so many people interacting and so much activity happening, one begins to learn about how systems work, how interactions between people and interactions between activities create outcomes. So systems thinking, systems working, it's easier to learn in a factory than just by oneself.
Absolutely. Wherever there are interpersonal dynamics, you see the, things in motion and in action. Now, I read the book. I saw that photograph of Mr. Mulgaonkar and Mr. J.R.D. Tata.
Yes.
They're like friends, They're like two friends interacting. Yes. That's how they came across. Yes. And your book starts by quoting Robert Frost from The Road Not Taken. Mm-hmm. And as a young adult, my father got me onto Robert Frost. Of course, the first thing my father got me was the woods are lovely, dark and deep, and he put it on my table. Yeah. You have miles to go and miles to go before you sleep. But for our viewers, let me put this out. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So, tell us, Tata's and the leaders at Tata's, the managers at Tata's, literally created roads. Not only they took roads that weren't there, they actually created them. So give us a sense on how this book came about.
Yes. Well, the book came about the idea for it on a flight from here, Delhi to Singapore, when I was sitting in the plane, just per chance, with my very good old friend, Dr. Tarun Das, who was the founder of CII and created the CII, and then he's founded many other institutions, and we've known each other for 30-40 years, more than that. And worked together. Just by chance, he happened to be on the same flight and had to have a seat next to me on the flight. So we're just catching up. And he asked me what I was going to do in Singapore. So I just told him I'm there for 3 days with some German think tank to understand how Singapore is ensuring that there's inclusive growth and remains to be, always. It's a society in which even the poorest people are doing pretty well. And that's how it's developed. That's where I'm going to there. And then he said to me that he goes there very, very frequently, Singapore. And so he was sharing his experiences about the modern Singapore technology and all that. So we're connecting my stories of when I was in Singapore, which I told him. He was surprised. He says, "You mean to say you were in Singapore in the 1960s when the country was just founded?" I said, "Yes. Just when Lee Kuan Yew became Prime Minister of the country as it was founded, he had spoken to Mr. Tata and requested Mr. Tata's help to help build industries in Singapore." He said, "My goodness, people don't seem to know this." I said, "Well, I was there." So then he asked me, he said, "There must be many things that you have learned in your life with Tata. They're a remarkable organization." And so we sharing stories, I was telling him stories. He started noting these stories down, one after the other. And when the flight landed in Singapore, he gave me this piece of paper. He said, "Here, there are 10 stories. Now, your job is to go write these stories because they're really worth learning." I think people today must remember that we have it in us, that Indians can do it and do it very well. In fact, people like Singapore were turning to India to learn how to do it. So it's learning, right? To do it. So that's how the seed came. And when I came back here after some weeks or months, Penguin said, "You got a book in mind?" I said, "I really don't, but there are the stories here. That would make a great book." I said, "All right." So then from 10, as I kept reminiscing, it turned out to be 20 odd stories.
And there are 24 chapters.
Yes.
Let me then start with the first chapter. It says, "The Farsighted Leader."
Yes.
Right? So, what's your point of view? First, give us examples from the Tatas. Of course, Mr. J.R.D. Tata, Mr. Mulgaonkar,
yes,
were themselves tall giants in terms of
yes,
leadership. And I know later you have a chapter called, the Shy Architect.
yes.
Later in the book, you have a chapter called The Shy Architect. Give us a sense of how leaders were then and how leaders are now, and what has changed.
Right. Well, leaders are then far-sighted leaders, as you said. But firstly, I was talking about Lee Kuan Yew. I mean, he was a very far-sighted leader. And he had this foresight to know that unless the people of Singapore learned and grew their skills, Singapore couldn't grow. And unless the people of Singapore learned and grew their skills, they wouldn't be able to earn competitively in international markets. So the foresight was that we have to help our people, nurture our people's ability to learn and provide them opportunities to learn. And this is what Mulgaonkar had said when he shoved me off to the factory in Pune with this quote. He said, Maira, it's said about industrial development. He gave me the book, which is this great thing, which said of all the resources that man uses for economic development, the two that take longest to develop are a stand of timber, that's trees, and a body of trained men. Of course, should have said women also, but this book was, 60 years ago. A body of trained men and a stand of timber. And therefore, he said we have to start with these, the seeds of the trees and the seeds of young people learning, and the trees growing and the people learning. So the factory that he envisioned and created in Pune started first with a training school into which 16-year-old young chaps out of the ITIs or technical schools were coming and given a very polished training in workshops with good modern machines and good instructions. And that took 3 or 4 years. And then they were ready to start working on the machines that were then brought into the factory, because you didn't want your capital to be idle. If you first install the machines and then bring people and then they don't know how to work the machines, so you're losing, you're incurring costs without getting enough revenue out of it. And this way, you put the capital in later. Capital is more expensive for us in India. So to first say, let me put the capital down, then look around for trained people, it's the wrong way. And since they weren't then trained people available in Singapore, in India, one had to start with, well, let's train people and learn how to train people. And same is what you see Lee Kuan Yew said. We don't know, he said in Singapore, how to train people. You seem to know, come and help us. So that is the far-sightedness. Also, the planting of trees in around the factory. Firstly, the land that was given for industry there was completely barren outside Pune. It was just rocks, not even bushes. Barren. The land had been spoilt by years and years of overgrazing and human activity, not by industry, but by human activity over a couple of centuries. And this was the land given dry, no water. So we had to discover how to help the land to generate its own water, to capture and generate its own water, so that the trees that we were planting would start to grow. And as the trees grew, the birds came, and we had nature growing alongside the factory. The factory was growing inside nature. Now, this is far-sightedness. You have a whole system emerging, a human system and an ecological system around an industrial system or with an. This is far-sightedness.
Interesting. I wish our leaders thought long-term, they thought selflessly, and they thought systems. So you talk of systems in your second chapter. Mm-hmm. Tell us why systems are important and why do we need them even more than we needed in 30, 40 years back?
Yeah, Anurag, the world is quite concerned about meeting the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And we realize that there's so many things that need to be fixed very fast. Otherwise, humanity can't sustain itself. Things to do with the environment, things to do with the condition of people in societies, poverty, inequality, health, education. There's so many things, 17 goals, 17 different important things to be achieved. Now, all these 17 things are not isolatable from each other. I mean, poverty cannot be isolated from education or health, and they can't be isolated from livelihoods, which can't be isolated from the environment. It's a whole system. So we've got a systemic problem. And our way of solving problems, which we've been taught as managers, is to focus, get the right expert, have a plan to fix the problem. And so we have this big khichdi of so many experts, each of them solving a part of the problem, and while solving that part of the problem, creating problems for other people who are trying to solve other parts of the problem. And so the overall progress is slow, as well as we're incurring more costs and causing more harm while we think we're making progress overall. So the approach of understanding that you are only a small part of a very large system, that even though you may be a great expert, you only know a little bit of the whole system. Through education, as we go up, to masters and to PhDs, we become more and more knowledgeable about less and less. So the people at the top who are trying to find solutions for global problems, each of them knows a lot about very little, actually. And there's hardly anyone who seems to sense the whole and to be able to put it together. So the example like I gave about Murgaonkar, he was just saying, there's the environment, think about it, get experts about the environment like we got. People who understood trees, people who understood birds, they were all part of industrialization. And you'd be saying, what role does a horticulturist, what role does an ornithologist have in an industrial project? But they were part of it. You need it all to work together. So this is why today I say we got to recover the art of collaborative working amongst experts, and for which they need to be all of them together systems thinkers.
Absolutely, Mr. Maira. I keep saying we live in a 3C economy post-COVID: collaborative, compassionate, and contactless. So clearly collaborative, and again, we don't need to be physically together for collaboration. Today, collaboration happens remotely, and it does work. So I agree with you that we need systems for collaborative output and collaborative thinking, and collaborative thinking can bring solutions that we may find useful. Now, let me come to the third chapter.
Mm-hmm.
You said building an institution. That's what the third chapter in the book is, right? We live in a time where institutions are being weakened rather than being built. And I know this is a private institution, and I'm talking of public institution. Let me make that distinction. But the true test of an institution is the leadership that you create and how long you sustain that leadership, and does the organization endure the values and self-sustain over many generations. Tatas have clearly showcased that, in spite of the mystery row a couple of years back. Tatas are still the most respected business in the country, or amongst the most respected business. So tell us, how did the leaders contribute in building an institution rather a company?
Nowadays I find everyone realizing that we got to build institutions, or at least we got to stop destroying the institutions that we have. And when people think about building institutions, many young people and even people who have a lot of philanthropic money want to build an institution. The first thing they seem to think about is, we'll have to have a board, we'll have to have a building, and maybe we need a piece of land to put the building on. It's the physical aspects of the institution. And when they say board, of course, then you say, well, what's the board responsible for? And then you already begin to wonder that, well, we better have big, dignified people on the board, big people on the board. So you're always about what's inside, not about what's the purpose of the institution that you're building. So first think of purpose of it, and that purpose must relate to its value to many other things outside, because no institution exists just for itself. It cannot survive. You create an institution because there's something missing, if you will, in the whole system, and you need an institution to fill that need. So you start with what does the system need and what institution is required in that, so the purpose of it. Then you think about whether you need a building at all. You may not need a building for this institution. Institutions are what? Institutions are people working with certain norms and values with, in their mind, especially when you said like a public institution, to serve a broader cause. So it's their values, it's their principles, it's the processes that they use to interact with the environment around them and to be able to work more effectively together to serve the environment. So that's what an institution is. Now, so we start with that concept. Okay? You mentioned about private. Now, we do have corporate boards, but they're created from the very beginning with a clearly selfish purpose, which is you are responsible for the monies that investors are putting into this so-called institution, which is the corporation, to ensure that that money produces the most return. So the purpose is a very selfish purpose beforehand. And yes, you may not need a building, and many in the financial services institutions don't need any buildings at all. They need a board to do what? To protect the interest of the investors. It's not to serve anybody outside, frankly. So these are the questions that are to be addressed now when we talk about the quality of institutions that we have. Our private institutions are too narrow in their outlook. They serve themselves. And our public institutions are beginning to be compared in terms of performance with private institutions and by the same metrics. Like, if I could say, public sector banks of India, who've been around for 50, 60 years, are being today compared with the very successful private sector banks on the metric of how much value have they created. And we say that the private sector banks have created much more value. But in what terms? The shareholder prices that went up. Now, is that the only value?
Part of that.
Yeah.
I mean,
so is that the only?
And the planet are equally important as profit.
Yeah. So if you look at the LIC or our public sector banks like State Bank of India, I mean, the amount of value they've created in people's lives for generations now, is that computed back into the shareholder price of share price of LIC or State Bank? Of course not. So how do you say that two private sector banks in India have created more value than those other institutions have? So, say, therefore, the concept of an institution, I'm saying all institutions, and I'm suggesting today even private institutions, better look at whether they are nurturing the environment around them from which they're drawing a lot of resources. And this is where you talk about what is shifting for Tatas also. As Tatas have come into the world where capitalism and share values rather than the values of being a good person or a good institution matter so much, the Tatas have to respond to that. Yeah, so they're being judged by, are they creating value? And I'm telling those stories to show that Tatas have created great value, and this is the nature of the value they've created, which are foundations for our society actually. And just like you can count the fruits on the trees, but you forget that there are roots that actually enable the fruits to come. And so if you were to take a tree and look at the bottom half and say, this is useless, there's no fruit on it. But without those roots, they won't get the fruits above. We keep wanting to pluck the fruits and not nurture the roots.
Can't pluck the fruits without nurturing the roots.
Yes.
It's so true. Now, you also talk about the postcards to JRD Tata. Give us real content from one of the postcards to JRD Tata.
Well, there are two that I mentioned specifically in the book, but JRD had this practice that what matters is really that people are well treated. It's about human beings. And yes, we have to create systems for the sake of, as we say, good management and efficiency, because the companies must produce some returns, but people shouldn't be lost sight of. And so managers inadvertently perhaps may be unkind or unfair to people. So to ensure that the values, the human-centered values of Tatas would never be forgotten, it was allowed for any Tata employee, wherever they were, to write a postcard to JRD Tata, Bombay. And there was this person who used to sit next to me in the office in Bombay House, and his job was to every week open all the postcards every day as they came, and then to answer them. That will be attended to. At the same time, to write a strong letter on behalf of Mr. JRD Tata to the company concerned that be in receipt, please say two things. What has been done about this specific complaint so far? And second is, how come your own human resource system hasn't solved it yet? So it was looking into both the complaint as well as the system. So that was so. So here's one which was really amusing, was a man who came by himself to Mr. Tata's office because he didn't trust the postal system, even though the Indian postal system was delivering these postcards addressed to JRD Tata. Of course, sometimes they had the full address and sometimes it was just his name in Bombay. It came. He brought it himself and gave it to the secretary. And he says, I didn't trust the system. I want Mr. Tata to have this. So that man, big man, with his postcard was brought to Mr. by the peon, Mr. Tata's peon, and said, ye saab ke liye aaya hai. So he looked at this big guy and said, what's the problem? So this fellow takes off his big man, takes off his shirt. He said, I have no problem. So Gadgil got frightened. He says, no, it's okay. And the peon also came back and said, no, calm down. So then he asked him and he said, you see, the company says I'm not medically fit, but you can see I'm fit. And so they're not letting me come back to work. Now he had been mentally disturbed. So the company had, got him treatment at home, and it was the longest treatment, but he was being looked after and paid, but he wanted to be at work. So now Mr. Gadgil had to calm him down and say, look, we'll look into it and so on. So, these people could reach Mr. Tata about anything. The other one, the story was of Mrs. Sudha Kulkarni at the time, Miss Sudha Kulkarni, who then turned out to be Sudha Murthy, Narayan Murthy's wife, who wrote she wrote a letter to Mr. Tata saying that, she has been refused by the panel that's interviewing people for telco because they say that we can't take any lady engineer candidates. And so he asked Sumant Magaonkar and asked me, he said, how come and why not? You're looking for talent. You're so thirsty for talent in this country, good engineering talent to build an enterprise which is going to be so hard to build. So why is a woman being refused? So I pointed out that, look, this woman insists that she will want to work on the shop floor. And on the shop floor, there'll be men only around her. And there's just workmen around her. And we have to guarantee her safety also. And there are no toilets specifically for women, which the Factories Act will require us to have. So at this stage, we cannot have a woman engineer working in the factory. And Mr. Tata said, he said, then think about the cost of it. How much talent are you losing just because you haven't got a toilet for women on the shop floor? Of course, she was given a job, Sudha Murthy, Kulkarni at the time. And as Narayan Murthy and she both have said that if Mr. Tata had not given her the job, it was in our company, Narayan Murthy couldn't have, broken out and started his enterprise without any money, and there wouldn't have been Infosys today. So that way, Mr. Tata created two of the best IT companies in India, TCS as well as Infosys.
Thank you, Mr. Maira. Now, there are 24 chapters. I can't get to talk about all of them, but there is a chapter called Learning to Learn. Tell us a bit about that chapter and what's in it, the chapter, and what is the central message of that chapter?
Yeah. For this, I would like to go to Japan a little bit. I discovered, but first we were learning to learn in India because Sumant Magaonkar, like you said, was calling our factory a learning factory from the beginning. It was a factory in which one learned, and then one learned to learn so that one could learn better and improve faster than people elsewhere. Because in India, we were, behind everybody in technology. So it wasn't enough just to learn technology from others because they advanced further. Unless we learned to learn faster than them, we never catch up and then keep ahead of them thereafter. Now, the Japanese, after the Second World War, realized that they were behind industries, in every industry, compared to the US and Europe. And they were determined to catch up and to be world beaters. And so they, if you recollect, had introduced these practices of total quality management, as we now all know them, which was about equipping workers with statistical tools, simple statistical tools with which workers together could sit down in their workplace and understand what was going on in the system in which those workers were together running a particular production line, let's say. And so they were able to figure out what was going wrong or not going as well in their own production line and what each of them could do to change their actions so that the whole performance of their production line would be improved. Things would come out more quickly with less waste. So they used time as a metric, which was a new thing. Because economists are very used to saying input, output. Put so much material in, so much material comes out, that's a productivity. Or so much money in, so much money comes out, that's a productivity. They introduced the metric of time, that you must learn to produce something at the end of the line in less time than it takes so far, that anybody else can take. And they found that and proved that if you take less time, it means that you're avoiding needless activity. So that is the waste that's taken out. And the needless activity has needless material being used and energy being used. That's also taken out. So cost goes down, quality and reliability improves, while the metric that you're using to improve the process is time. It's time. But more than that was that let's see then how workers learn. And can we equip them with better tools so that they could learn even faster? So that's learning to learn. So the manager's job and the factory overall manager's job was to understand how the factory was learning. That's coming back to your concept of the learning factory. Is the factory overall becoming competitive faster than it used to previously? So are we catching up faster in the last year than we were previously? And so how soon are we going to overtake the Germans and the Americans? And having got there, now that you know how to learn, you keep doing it. And the others can't catch up with you. So that's what happened and has continued to happen for a long time. The Japanese just got so far ahead of the others that even when the rest of the world said, oh, this is unfair competition, and told the Japanese to double the value of the yen, if you remember the Plaza Accords, and said, we'll crimp them now. Everything out of Japan will be twice as costly, so Americans won't buy it. What the Japanese went back and did was, using that way of learning to learn even faster, they just reduced the cost of whatever they did in Japan even more. And even though their currency was twice as expensive, they were still the best in cars and everything, still in the United States market. It's because they had learned how to learn faster. They had learned how to learn faster. And this was Sumant Morgaonkar's genius too, that you must learn to learn faster. And we'd ask this, like I said, he'd asked the Mali, 3 days ago, you said you were doing this. So next time he'd ask him, 3 days ago, what were you doing? And he'd begin to notice that the person was then talking about something yesterday. Kal, and today already I'm thinking of what to do differently. All of us as managers will ask the same. Okay, what is something new that you have learned this month? That was his question. He said, we expect something new from everyone. I want something new from everyone, something new for you. You weren't doing it before because you didn't know how to do it before. So tell me, what is it that you learned to do? All the time. So if you stop learning, the factory stops learning and we stop competing.
Thank you, Mr. Maira.